Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Smart Food Safety Podcast brought to you by Provision Analytics. I'm Amy Wayne, Provision's Food Safety Content Manager, and I'm excited to bring you a conversation on smart food safety between Provision founder and CEO Erik Westblom
How can the sharing of data speed up the supply chain and get more product to the end consumer?
and former Deputy Commissioner at the FDA, Frank Yiannas.
And a lot of people were asking me, well, Frank, what is FDA going to do after food safety modernization?
This conversation was a part of this year's Food Safety LATAM Summit in Cancun, Mexico. And without further ado, here's Frank and Erik.
This concept of a new era of smarter food safety, I've always said it's not a tagline or a slogan. It's a new way of working. What does smarter food safety mean to you?
The data capture required to be compliant in some cases is nearly overwhelming. There are thousands of data points that have to be captured. I think the data, statistically, there's still over 90% of food companies are on paper or worse for the food safety data capture. How do you streamline the ingestion of that information and data so that your team can leverage that additional time and efficacy to start looking at predictive trends, things like that? Be smart on what the outcomes are rather than spending all that time just getting the data points in.
This new era is data-driven. The 20th century was the Industrial Revolution. The 21st century is the digital revolution. So now we're digitizing data, and that's driving a lot of the progress that we're seeing in the world around us. I love your emphasis on connected data because there's many different data sources. So now we can use data that maybe we weren't sure of or we can get that are related. And I agree with you. We have to start digitizing data, and we're becoming more specialized. One of the things I strongly believe is the general approaches just don't work as effective as specific approaches. And that's why if you go to the doctor, you won't go to a generalist if you have a heart problem, right? You want a heart doctor. And so specialization. Always believe that we should not be chasing the technology, right? We're not chasing the shiny coin. Boy, that AI sounds cool. Let me see what I can do with that. Or blockchain, that sounds fascinating. But we're trying to solve public health challenges, right? And it's about matching the technology with the public health problem that we're trying to solve. And that's what's so encouraging. What are some of the emerging food safety issues that you think we are seeing on the horizon? And what technologies do you think are potentially useful or a tool to help us address them?
I think it's identifying trending within a supply chain, within a region, or within individual facilities and plants that you're operating. It allows operators, employees to get ahead of potential issues within their product and their operation. But then further to that, it can mitigate some of that risk. And again, it boils down to the data you're capturing, the information you're capturing. How are you putting that to use with this new time savings really that's in place? And at the end of the day, there may be multiple technologies that can do that. But your point, Frank, is you're not just chasing the buzzword of the day. You're actually looking at an outcome first and then trying to find what to apply.
So your response is that you think some of these risk intelligence, risk prediction tools or trend tools might be really useful for us to try to anticipate what's around the corner.
Absolutely. And I don't know, anyone that's heard me speak, I've got some really brash opinions on something like blockchain. That was the exact opposite example. You had a mousetrap that was trapping no mice.
AI has taken the business community by storm, right? Everybody wants their food safety ChatGPT, right? And some of the cases are powerful, but it's not easy to do. So looking at small and medium enterprises, what advice do you have to them on how do you get started? Where do you get started? I'm fascinated with the technology. I think any food safety professional has an interest in predictive analytics. How do you get started on such a challenging topic?
First of all, I think that this is at an extreme infancy point. We're not even at the beginning of an inflection point. AI is very much a buzzword right now. Everyone is still trying to figure out what applies and how, regardless of it's being food safety or auto mechanics, right? It starts with structured data capture. You have to collect data in a way that you can train a model. If you came into a grade 2 classroom and changed the curriculum every single day, students will never learn anything. So first and foremost, you have to capture structured data that you can train an AI to learn consistently. And then there has to be a level, I'm not saying it'll happen in a year, 2 years, 5 years, a level of data sharing within the community to help enhance these models so you're gaining consistency. At Provision, we mess around for a couple of years with some of the early large language models and a few different things to see if we could build the ChatGPT of food safety, preemptively look at audit preparation or audit execution type reports to mitigate the impact on people coming into your facilities. We got some of those models to, high 80s, low 90%, but that's nowhere close enough to be confident. And it's because in many cases, you're limited to the information captured within your own facilities or your own operation. The way that we're looking at it is, not 2 years, but how do we structure data to capture so that in 5, you could do regional or commodity-based benchmarking for food safety risk in apples or carrots or potatoes or whatever, right? And those are all low risk items. Now, what if you could apply that to tomatoes or lettuce? I don't know if I answered the question effectively. I just know that AI is way harder than it might sound.
Not easy to do, certainly desirable, but you gave a very good answer in that it starts with good data, clean, structured, good quality data. You need that I think all of us will have areas of our organization that we'd want to strengthen our predictive capabilities, whether it's on a supply chain issue, whether it's a product from a certain country, likelihood of pathogen occurrence. I mean, what is the predictive question that would benefit you the most? And try to define that with specificity to the extent that you have data, good quality data associated with that, or can get sources of data and clean it up. It seems to me those are two foundational steps you have to take before you just call up the AI expert and say, come into my company, I want AI. What's your favorite real world application where AI is already being used in our profession?
I think there's maybe two answers to this. One goes back to a more simple reporting type answers using some of these ChatGPT equivalents to just run your reporting that would have taken you hours doing manually. We've seen that put to work, albeit not 100% accurate. Specific to what we have done and solved, we work with the largest fresh and frozen shipping company in Canada. They move around 60% of all product across the country. And they've got a BRC program rolled out across 9 different terminals across the country. As part of our rollout for our software, we digitize all that paperwork and bring it to life. What we did in the meantime, as part of streamlining that effort on data capture, they scanned and uploaded all their yard checks, trailer checks, and all of the information associated to their trailers, their trucks, and all of that paperwork. There were a couple hundred data points. By scanning that information on those paper records, like physically scanning it with a printer, pulled those images in, stripped the data out to pre-populate a number of the BRC records to have that work downstream to then pre-populate some of their insurance paperwork for claims. So if stuff shifted in the back of the truck, the one case was a pallet of tuna crushed a pallet of strawberries. So somebody owed somebody else money. And we had preemptively, through seemingly disparate pieces of paper, populated a bunch of information to streamline their entire insurance claims process, saving them, it was literally thousands of hours.
That's awesome. And real quickly, the one I will share was a work process that we did at FDA. 94% of all seafood consumed by Americans comes from abroad. And we conducted a pilot where we started taking all the data that FDA has, lots of seafood shipments year after year, cleaned it up, which was not easy, but overlaid machine learning onto the current Predict system. That's our national import system. And we've talked about it publicly. We increased our chances of finding violative seafood shipments by 300%. Amazing. You know how hard we work to try to get 10% increases in compliance? 300% increase in our ability to predict which shipment of seafood was violative. So this is real and it's here now. Now let's transition from AI to something I think a little bit more foundational for this new digital revolution is we need digital data. Erik, you were saying there's still too much data, food safety data on paper. I love this quote by Bill Gates that says, data on a piece of paper is a dead end. Data in digital form is the beginning of meaningful action. I know you're wrestling with it. I visit a lot of facilities, digitizing data. What advice do you have? Practical advice to them. They want to start digitizing data. How do they start?
This one's critical, and I think I've got a great answer for this. When you go digital and you're selecting a piece of software to solve your problem, don't pick the one with the most features. This is, the iPhone all over again. It comes down to picking the tool that is the most usable. Because if your staff, if your team, if the individuals don't use the product, you've achieved nothing except an increased cost. It has to be the most usable and user-friendly application to solve the problem. Then more individuals will use it and you end up with more data. Ultimately, there are many software solutions out there for many challenges, and you'll get the information in there, but if people don't use it, you won't get it in there. And it doesn't matter how many features that product has.
But there's themes that I'm hearing in your answers. Like you can start small, right? So oftentimes people want to sit back. They want to get requests for proposals. To your point, they want the system that has the most bells and whistles. And you could take years trying to get through that process. And you're just saying, and I agree with this philosophy, is start small. Will there be some misses? Will there be some, enhancements that need to be made? Do a proof of concept. And if it works, then you can scale. As opposed to the old mentality, when I was growing up in the business world, it was you go all in, you do a big pilot, and then you might be $1 million in and you say, oops, pick the wrong system. So start small, proof of concept, and you can be agile these days, right? You can be quick and say, okay, let's scale up to the next level, and then we'll scale to the next level. So great advice. Okay, good advice on digitizing data. Another area that's big, I think for some of these tools to work, we have to do a better job with data sharing. We talked about predictive analytics, machine learning, AI, digitizing data. But now we're no longer talking about technology. We're talking about a social problem, right? It's the technology and the psychology. Data sharing is still a problem. And for some of these solutions to scale, I think we have to, as food safety professional community, be willing to share data. Any examples that you've seen where we've overcome that data sharing hurdle? And how did they overcome the hurdle? Because there's a real hurdle and unwillingness to share data. But any examples that you've come across?
Yeah, so I'll start at something that's probably really close to home for Frank. But 2015-16, IBM Food Trust came out and they sort of got their elbows up and wanted to collect as much data as possible and almost hold it all for themselves. And they had this vision of connecting all the data in the whole supply chain all under one umbrella. Completely unrealistic given the fragmentation and size of the food supply chain globally. I think in a way analogous to something like Facebook and Cambridge Analytica that started to scare some companies. Some food companies ultimately thought, I've got all this secret sauce internally. I don't want to share that with the guy beside me. Fast forward 8-9 years later, we're starting to see partnerships grow, many technology companies working together, many food companies starting to work together. And a specific direct reference and example to what you're asking, Frank, we're starting to see a lot of growers of fresh produce, the packing houses and the wholesalers that they either work with on a direct contract basis or on an ad hoc basis, open up some of those channels of communication around food safety specifically.
Right. Data sharing, real critical. One example that I am pretty proud of, and I'm involved with them as a strategic advisor, is Western Growers. It's an association in California and in Yuma, leafy green growers, and they've started a data sharing project. They do a lot of testing their fresh leafy greens in the field. They call it pre-harvest testing. The growers collectively test millions of samples a year, and most members are participating in putting their data in anonymously in a data platform. So you can see signals that maybe your company alone would not see. And when I was at FDA, I was a big proponent of public-private data sharing. With industry having millions of data points, why would FDA have to go do a sampling assignment if we trusted? Well, we have to, that's a whole different problem, is how do you create economic models for people to share data? So one more question. We talked a lot about AI and machine learning, and I think they're profound type of innovations that are going to affect our business and improve food safety. I believe they will result in improving food safety. But in some respects, I'm actually even more excited about other emerging technologies. The Internet of Things, the idea that anything that's physical can be digital and given a digital identity. Think about our profession, being able to track foods, time and temperature, how equipments are working, any type of physical asset. What is your idea? We'll just probably pause on IoT, maybe some thoughts on IoT and the future of IoT in food.
First of all, I think it's incredible. You're capturing a lot of information seemingly in a level of automation. On one side, you've got tools like RFID or NFC for kind of consumer data ingestion and communication. On the other side, I think where I would push the envelope a little bit is those things are becoming a little bit long in the tooth in terms of technology that's been around. Some adoption, some poor adoption due to cost and infrastructure requirements. What I'm very excited to see happen is where you've got Amazon leading the way with something like Amazon Go. If you've been into one of these stores, I was at a hockey game 3 months ago, walked in, scanned my credit card on the way in, grabbed a beer and walked out. And all of a sudden this hits my credit card. And I was looking around trying to figure out how the hell it just happened. So I'm a computer science guy and looking at all these cameras on the roof, trying to understand all the steps and all the computer science in between to know exactly which beer I grabbed and what charge. And there are no employees. This is at a stadium and there are 100 people going in and out. So that got me thinking, is how many cameras would it take to put in at scale into a facility where you know exactly what is leaving? And then if you have it tokenized through, an AirTag or an RFID device as it's on its way out, now you're actually carrying the information where it goes. And it brings together a lot of your vision, Frank.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I mean, there are some technologies like RFID. I am working on the Chipotle advisory board, and they've rolled it out to their entire supply chain. The visibility that they have in terms of what product and cases are coming into their stores is incredible. But there are new and emerging technologies that are post RFID, like ambient IoT, that aren't going to be as costly. You're going to get them down. There's Internet of Thing tags that look the size of a postage stamp that are a fraction of the cost of a U.S. postage stamp. A U.S. postage stamp, I don't know what it runs this day, 50-something cents. You can get an IoT tag for a fraction of that. So it's exciting. But what I heard on IoT, enthusiasm about the potential, but caution about how we roll it out. I could go on for another hour with you, and maybe we will with a couple of drinks, and the conversation will become even more creative. I think everyone should remember this. Investing in public health is investing in the nation's infrastructure. Food security is national security. I remember in the U.S. when the pandemic came along, Congress was spending billions of dollars, and a lot of the money was going for national infrastructure. And I wrote a lot of memos that went to the White House saying we need to invest in public health infrastructure to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars, and taking that money and then giving it to the states, because it's as important as the national interstate highway system, right? Having good public health surveillance. So I agree with you completely.
I think a very quick response to that from a government perspective, how can they, drive influence? One, I think is through technology challenges. Frank, while you were at the FDA, there was the low-cost traceability solution challenge. We submitted an application to that, saw the kind of lake of applicants. There were 100 plus. Everyone had a different interpretation that helps everybody think differently on the topic. Good. Phenomenal. The second one is through government grant funding.
Mm.
A lot of these challenges are very nebulous and hard to solve scientifically. We're small companies. The industry from a technology standpoint is very immature right now. It takes capital to solve this stuff. So if there's Canadian, from our perspective, being a Canadian company, we've raised almost 9 million Canadian in government grants to continue to pick away at these
Great.
really challenging
amazing.
science problems. So the more the US government, the Mexican
Amazing.
government, whatever
Yeah.
it is.
Great answers, great
but-
questions. I'd like to close this way with this main thought in mind. Imagine a future where you can predict where the next problem is going to be in your supply chain. Imagine a future where you want to monitor a CCP in your food production facility, and you have a pretty good understanding sitting right there in your chair how that CCP is performing. Imagine a day when you want to know where a food product comes from, and you can scan it and find out where it came from with specificity in 2 seconds, not 7 days. That's the future that we're talking about, the new era of smarter food safety. And I don't think it's wishful thinking. I think it's upon us. And you will be the ones that will make it happen. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. To learn more about what Provision is doing to support smart food safety efforts across all parts of the food industry, or to see what the platform's all about, visit our website at provision.io today. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you'll join us for the next installment.